The intention of this law is to see people executed. This law was passed with an absolute Zionist consensus. But in this particular law, it allows mass trials, show trials, and it could be used for further mass arrests of Palestinians. So I think the intention here is to see death penalties enacted. It is very clear that the other death penalty law, passed recently, appears to have been more declarative. And the assumption is that the Supreme Court in Israel will not allow it to pass. It was a sloppily put together law, let alone all the problems associated with death penalty. The intention of this law is to see people executed. We should make no mistake on that. And there's something else one has to draw attention to in that respect. This law was passed with an absolute Zionist consensus. So all of the Zionist political parties in the Israeli parliament, from the so-called left right through to the most extreme right, first of all, you had government and opposition members of parliament proposing this law, and then you had all those parties backing the law. Not one Zionist vote against the law. Everyone who was in the country who was available showed up. The exception, and they didn't vote against it, were the Palestinian Arab parties representing that population inside Israel. They declared that they saw the entire effort as illegitimate. They were not going to be part of this, and therefore they absented themselves from the vote. They spoke against the law in the debate. So now that you have a law with the death penalty passed with an overwhelming majority, it is almost inconceivable that the Supreme Court will oppose this law, and one should expect that these special tribunals, lower evidentiary basis, show trials, different rules when it comes to TV, media coverage, that these tribunals will be established, they will find people guilty, they will impose the death penalty. And a crucial thing to bear in mind, and this is part of the explanation of this law, is that they are trying to create an equivalence here between 7th of October and the Nazis. We constantly have heard the Israeli claim that this is the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. This is trying to mobilize this sense that the new Nazis are supposedly the Palestinians, and therefore you can do anything to them. I would argue that this is a reckless, irresponsible, deceitful trivialization of the Holocaust. This is not what happened in the Holocaust. The Holocaust wasn't an act of Germans after years of German Jews keeping Germans under occupation and apartheid. This is one of the most pernicious attempts to rewrite history by the State of Israel, and that's what this law and these death penalties will be designed to do. So we now have two laws passed in quick succession. One was a death penalty law for, as they describe it, future crimes which can only be used against so-called Palestinian terror. In other words, part of the apartheid system. It can only be applied to Palestinians, not Israeli Jews. Now you have a new law, which is to set up a special tribunal specifically to target those arrested in relation to the crimes of October 7th, and potentially those who will be arrested in the future. And what this allows is the application of the death penalty to people already arrested. So there's an element of retrospective here, which the other bill wouldn't have captured. It also allows a different kind of trial in the Israeli system. Of course, that is a system that is applied prejudicially anyway to Palestinians. But in this particular law, it allows mass trials, show trials. It lowers the level of evidentiary basis for reaching a conviction. It allows the inclusion, for instance, of confessions reached under conditions of torture. And it could be used for further mass arrests of Palestinians to be swept up and then have the death penalty imposed on them. So this is I know people would be cynical, understandably, in saying, what does it matter? You know, Israeli law is always going to be applied with a different set of standards to Palestinians. But this is creating a whole new structure for mass convictions and the mass imposition of death penalties, which did not exist previously in the Israeli legal system.